Da 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 da. Unck. What about that?
I hate it already.
Welcome to this episode of Unck. We want Unck to be a place where we can visualize and work through uncomfortable conversations.
While also teaching each other how to become better at uncomfortable conversations through reflections and receipts.
Show me the receipts.
Hey.
Ricky, this episode's really a fun one. We're doing sex education today. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's
talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about
sex. We are going to have one guest on shortly to talk about all things sex, and I can't wait.
I'm super excited. I think that sex is an extremely important conversation. That's super taboo, super uncky. So I'm excited to dive right in.
Yeah, me too.
And we're here!
Yay!
So today our uncomfortable conversation is about all things sex ed. The unkiness of sex, the things that we really should have learned in school about sex, and anything in between. We have a very special guest from NormalizeThis and from articles across the interwebs, Kenny Francoeur. Hi.
Thanks. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you giving us your time.
My pleasure, please.
So Kenny, as we're going to start off, the three things that we ask for any uncomfortable conversation, and even though this one's a little different because it's more educational, we have our ABCs. A, for active listening. It's very often that we want to have a conversation where we think about what we want to say next instead of listening to what's actually being shared with us. B, for bike rack, which should be interesting for this conversation because it's about sex and we might bike rack all the time, but bike racking basically means if we go onto a tangent to a conversation that's very far off from the topic, one of your hosts may, sometimes it's me. Actually, most of the time, it's me. But
Don't take the bike racking. We're gonna have to do it because
okay.
So
Okay. So that's bike racking, and then C is compassion. So just no matter if we agree or disagree, we're having this conversation with compassion and keeping this place a safe space. With that said, Kenny, what is your Unck? What's an identifying figure that we might not know about you? And what native land are you acknowledging today?
So for my Unck, less of something that I'm uncomfortable talking about, but something that bothers me in uncomfortable conversations are when people come at them militantly in order to change someone's mind. So specifically when conversations about sex, when really, when you come at it aggressively, you're never going to make someone feel more comfortable with the content. You're going to push them away. So I think with conversations specifically around sex, but probably with everything, my Unck would be aggressive vocabulary that just kind of forces the issue to become larger. My characteristic, I don't know. My characteristic, I would say, you know what, that people might not really think about me given what I talk about or how I talk about things. Right now I am, and I've kind of always been, I'm a baby crazy person. I don't want any of my own, but like I will touch or hold anyone's baby given the opportunity, which also makes all this COVID stuff much sadder because I don't think I would ever willingly touch a child again.
Don't you have a niece?
I do have a niece. She's turning 1 this month. I'm absolutely. I can't wait to teach her all of these dear.
But also really important, as we're going to get into, like kids learning from people they can trust true things about sex is rare and far between.
And finding the line between, finding that blunt honesty, because kids can read the bullshit. They can read right through it. And
right.
I'm sure you guys could. And then my native land today is Lenape, is the Lenape tribe.
So I think we should just jump straight into it. I think that to kick off, this conversation about sexual education, may be a good idea for us, all three of us, to just talk about, a misconception that we had growing up about sex, or that we were told, and that now we realize isn't necessarily the truth, or we've learned something different. So, Kenny, kick us off.
Well, I think the biggest misconception about sex education as a discipline is that it is focused in consequences. We can learn about the earth and the environment without learning about how it will die or how it gets sick. We can learn how to enjoy it. We can learn how it thrives. We can learn how it works. And so I think as a discipline, when we look at sex education, we often think the majority of the time spent in a classroom, especially with like children and teenagers, is about STDs, is about pregnancy, is about abortion, is about those things that are consequences or byproducts of sex, and not about actually how to do it, how things work, musculature that's necessary for certain kinds of sex, certain positions. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is that sex education is consequence based. Because like for me, I've not learned very much in sex education or in health class. And I think a lot of, I am cis and gay, and I think a lot of cis gay men that I encounter talk about like, well, I didn't learn how to have, I don't know how to have gay sex. But gay sex isn't a thing. There are actions throughout a sexual experience that you do that anyone with your similar anatomy might be able to accomplish as well. So I think there is, so I think truthfully, I don't think any of us actually, unless you're really lucky, and I hope that next generation is going to be luckier than we are, none of us actually learn anything of value other than consequences. So that's all I learned. I would like to what I have had to kind of
That's a great point.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? I think that a lot of sex teaching is that you should just abstain, and that's it. It's basically like, don't do this because this is the result that's going to happen. I don't think I ever was really taught to enjoy it or to go out and have it. It was more of a finger pointing, don't do that.
And that comes from a lot of things are based in religion, or based like the practice of religion sort of intertwines through the education of sex in such a way in which I feel like we actually haven't gotten close to understanding its power and its like how much it can feel great, because we've had these like negative connotations. What were you going to say, Kenny?
Most people at some point in their life will have sex with another person. But I also think when it comes to like what we learn about abstinence, if we are to abstain from sex with a partner, then it would stand to reason that then we are experiencing pleasure on our own. And we also don't learn enough about our own anatomy, truthfully enough about our own anatomy and how things work in order to even effectively masturbate. I think a lot of people are dangerously masturbating, are doing it in ways not that's like dangerous to their health, but dangerous to their sexual experience, that they'll have negative connotations because, they won't know how to have an orgasm, or they'll really be muscling their way through it. And then it seems like it's something almost utilitarian.
Yeah, that was going to be my answer to your question, Ricky. My answer about like misconceptions, not necessarily through schooling, but through everyone else who taught me about sex, was that masturbation is bad, and that overstimulation for a woman can result in you not having good sex with your partner, which is untrue. And then also, this new one that I heard that just like blew me away from men was like this idea that sperm has so much power that it can create a human, like women aren't involved. And then also that means we should not masturbate to hold that power in until the time is right.
Wait, who are these people that you are talking to?
It's a little hotep. Full articles, and because the friend who shared this with me, and I was like rolling my eyes, sent me info about it, and people believe this. And that for me was a huge misconception, because what it then allowed, the domino effect of that was that I didn't know how to pleasure myself. I didn't know where my clitoris, clitoris is a huge organ, and I didn't know like the different ways in which I could reach my own orgasm, let alone teach someone else how to do that for me.
Right. Are these the same people that believe that the Earth is flat? I'm gonna hazard a guess and say probably.
Yeah, that would be mine. What's yours, Ricky?
So I guess mine is that sex always has to be penetrative. That's what I grew up believing. If you were having sex, there was some penetration involved. And that doesn't always have to be the case. And so that's a misconception that I have thwarted.
So what are some of the ways, or Kenny, with Normalize This, you may have some more insight on this, but for all of us, what are some places where you found better resources to help you on your sexual journey?
The awful and beautiful thing about sexual resources is that they literally, unless it is specifically about science, it literally cannot work for everyone. Like any good researcher, have several sources. Look at different things. Sex is an experiential thing. Getting rid of sex is a term of something you do with someone else, but as an activity to seek pleasure, whether you're doing it for yourself, by yourself, to someone else, with someone else, there is a bit of trial and error. I think being careful to not stick too much to either a clinical or a pornographic side is important, but I think a mixture of the two is essential. I think learning the nitty gritty of the science of how things work can help. For example, when it comes to anal sex, something that is often talked about as a gay thing, but is a literal any person with a rectum thing.
Most of us.
Huh?
Most of us.
Yes. It is about musculature. It is about soft and hard, or smooth and hard muscle. It is about relaxing muscle. It's about realizing what's happening in your body, the response to an apparatus, whether it's a finger, whether it's a toy, whether it's a phallus, whether it's, a neophallus, whatever it is. It's about how your body responds to those stimuli and what you can do to make that experience easier. So there's that side that's pretty clinical. And then also there are sites that are, even if they're not porn, they are fairly, what my mother would call pornographic, that are explicit, that talk more about experiences than about the science. So I think when you're looking at resources, you have to make sure you have enough of both in order to be able to kind of dive headfirst and enjoy the experience, being fully educated on it. Because I think too clinical, for me at least, being too clinical doesn't work. But having that in my back pocket is helpful, because then I can move forward with educated responses to physical stimuli.
Yeah, it does. Have you guys heard of the site Oh My God Yes, or OMG Yes? So this was a site, I guess, made for women by women to re-educate women on how to pleasure themselves and what makes them feel good. And it got a lot of traction when Emma Watson talked about it, which was like, what, this child star is talking about this? But of course she was a grown-up, and we just can't erase this idea of her as Hermione. But I remember I became really obsessed because I just recognized that I didn't know enough. I didn't know enough about my orgasm experience, and I didn't know enough about how to teach someone else, which has been really interesting partner-wise, to have partners who have said to me, this is your orgasm for you, and I'm just here to help guide and help support whatever you need from me, which is so different and so freeing from the male focused sex that you see in porn or you see in TV.
When in talking about like how to, when you had partners who would say like, this is your orgasm, in order to be a competent partner, you also have to have some knowledge of the anatomy of your partner. Not about like they need to disclose, you know, what their genitalia is, but having a general knowledge of how things work or what works, or, you know, the fact that when we were young in sex ed, at least in my experience, we were separated into, you know, the boys and the girls, and the boys went and learned about penises, and the girls went and learned about vaginas. And that's really not beneficial, especially because as we're seeing children being celebrated for coming out and coming out as trans younger and younger, I think it's important that we actually learn about different genitalia than our own, so that when we are you know, gleefully confronted with a piece of genitalia that is not exactly like what we look down and see, we can have some idea, and so that we can bring something to the table. Because I think, especially in sex, people aren't comfortable asking questions during, and so I think that is something to look at and examine on your own, and why we have those questions and why we're afraid to ask questions. But a great way to combat that is to learn more yourself, to maybe take some of those questions out. If you're only focused on your genitalia and your orgasm, it's not a good, it's not going to be a great experience. Even in a one night stand or a quick something, quickly in a hallway somewhere, having that knowledge, having that openness, being able to sense another person and what they're feeling and what's not working and what is working is a skill, and is one that I don't think we take any time to really focus on. The purpose of sex is an orgasm, isn't it? And it's really not. It's great if that happens, but that does not have to be the conclusion of a sexual experience. And I think adds a lot of shame, specifically people who have vaginas and clitorises. It adds shame to them if they're not able to get one during an experience, even though it is no fault of their own.
Sex is such a taboo subject, you know, like we just don't talk about it enough amongst our peers. You know, I probably in the last maybe 3 years, I started talking to my friends about sex. But prior to that, it was never discussed. It was not ever a subject that I would have felt comfortable broaching, and vice versa. And then when you do encounter, you know, an issue within sex or something that isn't quite right or doesn't feel quite right, the embarrassment that comes with, do I go and get that checked out? Do I Google it? Do I ask a friend? Do I show my mother? Do I ask my father? You know, it's so awkward that I think that we need to be more comfortable having these conversations.
I wish I had understood this earlier, but like the ownership of our own sexual experiences, whether it's because for girls, when you get your first period, you have to tell your mom, and like, even I remember talking to my mother about sex when it was okay to do that, and she was like, yeah, well, you should be having good sex. And that allowed me to have better sex. And that shouldn't have been the case. I shouldn't have like needed to hear from the person who gave me the only insight to intimacy, to have taken on ownership of my own sexual journey. And the fact, like, you're right that a bunch of adults have sex, but also like a bunch of kids have sex. When you hear like first stories about kids having sex, it's 15, 14, 17, teens, babies, and sometimes younger than that at no, sometimes forced rape situations. And I wonder what it takes in the sexual education in our schools or in our churches or in our media to shift the idea of who owns sex. Because even in consensual adult relationships, let's use a straight couple, I often see, and I often see this in a lot of the Black community, but perhaps just because I am in the Black community, men taking ownership over a woman's private parts and taking an ownership over a woman's orgasm in a way that I think doesn't really allow, like Kenny said, for actual successful, like enjoyable time to occur. Because what happens is women tend to feel like I'm a vessel for this man to jerk off in, not we're both sharing a sexual experience and like providing positive energy for both of us.
I just think when it comes to virginity, I think sex becomes something that someone can take and someone loses something. And I think if that becomes the narrative to your sexual experiences, if your virginity was taken in even in an okay way, we put such pressure on this moment, and then it feels as if we've lost something. There is end to innocence. And that's really unfortunate. And the brunt of that in this country is specifically put on cis women when it comes to the loss of virginity when they're young. It's about those conversations being meaningful, not purely pornographic, because a lot of that language that we use if we are just, joking about sex and talking about those things is also language that is used by abusers and by aggressors. You can bleep this out because I'm not sure if I can swear on the show, but when people talk,
no, swear,
fuck, cock, all those things, if those are your only kinds of words, pussy, things like that to talk about sex, then a lot of people can feel really thrown off because those are the exact same things. If anyone has been sexually abused, I only recall talking about my virginity when I bottomed for the first time. That's was taken. Receptive partners lose virginity. Most men don't talk about losing their V card when they have sex. There's not focus on male cis virginity. In doing that, we set up insertive partners as dominant partners, and we set them up as partners that can take something from a receptive partner, so that anyone who's, we essentially weaponize sex in how we hand over the tools for someone to use those tools to abuse someone else. And I don't think the conversation around sex has to be centered around that. I think sex is an amazing, enjoyable thing that can be used when you are happy, when you are angry, when you are sad. There have been times where, we hear people a lot in television or in porn, in film, in a lot of things about people wanting to get used. And it is helpful when looking at that kind of terminology as the person who would get used by a partner to really know what you're saying and if you mean it, or if you're just talking about having someone be more dominant, if you're looking to be submissive. Mm-hmm. Like there are much more healthy terms that are things that we should be talking about. I think sex ed, when we think about children, we think about children and then you're 18 plus. But the need for sex education is different pre-K through 5, 6 through 8 middle school, and high school. There are middle schoolers having sex. Mm-hmm. There is no need to beat around the bush and not give them information they would need. So I think from my perspective, in order to kind of move forward with these healthy conversations, it's about identity and consent and bodies at that 5th grade level. Once you reach middle school, it is about sex, and it is about talking about what happens. I envision a world where it is not unreasonable that high schoolers are actually studying and learning about kink, about those kinds of activities, because there are high schoolers participating in it. And no time in history has the government or a religious body telling people not to do something. At no point has that ever actually worked. And so we have to start looking at actually preparing people for what they need so that they don't leave high school, go to college, move to a big city, and then get abused.
I would go as far as to say that other than watching a clip on YouTube about reproduction and how a baby is made in class, children should understand what is pleasurable sex and abusive sex and staged sex, because it's so important. We learn about things that frankly we're never going to use again after 12th grade after we've passed that exam, but actual life skills and life lessons that we are probably going to be doing until we're well into our 60s, 70s, 80s, until maybe even the day we die, is that we don't really focus on, we don't give enough attention to. There's all this pressure put on, especially cis straight men in schools and colleges, that this person slept with that person, and now there's the pressure of the rest of the boys in the group or the troop to also have done it. And then we start airing on rape culture in college because, again, people feel this ownership of they need to have ticked off this box because Johnny Bravo did it,
Since we got into porn, let's just stay into porn for a second. What are some stigmas around porn? What are some things that you hate about porn? What are some things that you love about porn? What are some kinks that you go straight into, or that maybe if you don't want to talk about yourself, you know other people go straight into?
Oh, when it comes to my sex, God, I think my mother knows what I'm into by now. I will say I am pro-porn, which is not always a popular opinion. We're talking about what happens because of porn. But porn didn't create the problem. Porn can exacerbate it if there already is a problem, but it didn't start that problem. And so I think porn can be a very positive way to figure out what you're into, figure out what stimulates you, look at what things are, educate yourself. But we are made to consume porn in a shameful way because we're told from birth that these are things that we shouldn't look up. The internet is mostly porn. I forget the percentage, but it is astounding. So it's looking at, especially looking at things like OnlyFans, it's looking at how we use porn to our benefit. How do we make porn work better for our society rather than eliminate it? I think if it's used healthily, I think it can be an essential part of someone's sex life. Whether it's something you use for masturbation, whether it's something you watch with a partner. I personally think porn can be a good thing.
Rickster?
I agree. I think that it's, it allows people to have escapism. It's like reading a book in a sense. You can dive into a book and be transformed into a whole different world. And, on a train in the privacy of your own home, doing whatever you want. And I think porn allows people to live out fantasies, and to experience things that they wouldn't necessarily even know where to look for. If you are into threesomes or orgies or other things.
One, two.
Right. Other things. But also from an educational point of view, if you are trying to learn how to please a woman, if you are trying to learn how to give the best blowjob, there has to be somewhere for people to go and learn these things, especially if we're not going to have conversations and dialogues about it. And I think that it is an important tool for growth.
But there is a change in trends. In 2019, the most popular search on Pornhub was for amateur porn. There is one merited thing that is blamed on porn, but another that I don't think is as merited is the staged sex. Because I think people are looking for unstaged sex. We enjoy being voyeurs. It's why we enjoy the sending of nude and why we can also weaponize them is because people enjoy voyeurism. When someone posts that a celebrity has a nudie pic, how many people go and search it? How many well-meaning people? I have done the same thing, not
Right.
like I have done the same thing of seeing that, like, oh, so-and-so schlong is hanging out in this picture.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, I'm gonna go find
You're
it.
so right. Yeah.
I want to see, because we put such sanctity over the human body and what we cover with clothing, that you are never more vulnerable to American society, at least, than when you are butt naked. That is our most vulnerable. Nothing can hide you, nothing can shield you. No amount of hands and arms that you have access to can cover everything that you have. And so I think we enjoy being able to see those because we are also shielded from being able to access our own vulnerability in that way. There's such body shame. And so I think porn can, especially amateur porn, can really be a way to see more normalized sexual situations. The other side that I think porn can be blamed for are specifically cis men and abusive sexual experiences based on porn they see. Because they saw two professional porn actors, do this particular thing, they think that's normal. And I think that can be dangerous because it'll lead to people doing things without asking, because they see their porn star, their favorite lady porn star. The guy who's railing her doesn't ask. He doesn't do those things. He just pushes her. He pulls her hair. He does these things. And these are not great things if you haven't had the conversation to build the consent. I think the thing about the porn industry that we don't see is that they stop in between takes. They are moving up all the time because they're not going to have any fissures or tears with whatever they're doing. And they have signed, in most professional cases, they have signed contracts. They have dealt with consent. They have talked about exactly what the scene is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Porn is a fantasy. I can dream. I have had a dream where I've killed someone. Doesn't mean I went and did it. I can watch porn that can feel a little too aggressive, but it doesn't mean I'm going to go out and do it. If I've been taught and I have the right mental state to be watching this and doing this. So I think porn is pointed to as the problem. But the problem is we have a generation, we have all children who are being raised that these are things that are done in the dark and in secret. And when things are done in secret, when you have a mask on, there's, you can do whatever you want. And so when you're watching porn secretly in the basement, you're told that it's a terrible thing. And then you're told that sex is also a terrible thing, but you only see that as sex. And so you're going to do that because those are both in dark situations. I think that porn can exacerbate a problem that already exists that's caused by something that is not porn.
Right.
I think when it comes to, I'm a big fan of the OnlyFans resurgence. During all this COVID-19 quarantine, it's like a friend a day is starting to know for it. If we can start to see porn as valuable, we can actually start to fix the problems within it rather than just damn the whole industry.
So I wanted to shift this into talking about some other kinks like BDSM. Everyone and everyone's mother and everyone's grandmother read or watched or learned about 50 Shades of Grey.
Cool. I was worried about where you were going with that with everyone's grandmother at first.
Loves to choke and gag.
I was like, wait, pause.
But that is a fantasy that I think a lot of women and men, and I think even older generations who have not had the access that our generation had to talking about sex, really crave, right? Especially older generations who had less internet and less access to different people's thoughts and opinions. And so the actress Mara Wilson, who played Matilda in the classic Child's movie, broke all of our hearts when she decided to talk about sex, and we wanted to think about her as a kid. And she was like, hello, just like Emma Watson, I'm a grown up now. And she had a huge Twitter argument with E.L. James, the author of, what's it called? 50 Shades of Grey. And I was super grateful for the argument, because what she said was like the BDSM and Dom sub relationship in that was super abusive and so not written well. And so what happened is that people and their grandmothers were learning about BDSM maybe for the first time, maybe learning about Dom sub capital D tiny S for the first time through a medium that wasn't giving the full researched description about what it means and what those partnerships means and the responsibility each person has to take to jump into a BDSM relationship. And so then Mara Wilson suggested some books for us to read. Matilda was giving us the tea, okay? And so I just want to plug the Boss series by Abigail Barnett. I'm a huge fan. I've shared this book with many folks because it is super well researched, and the relationships are, there's still a rich white man and a young girl, but there's a bit about learning. When I've had sexual experiences since reading that book, I have more vocabulary to discuss with my partners about what we can and cannot do and how to navigate it. And so, when we're talking about porn, I thought that was something interesting to bring up. But speaking, does anyone want to add in there before I jump?
Well, I just want to jump in. I also love the idea when you said, like capital D, lowercase s, but actually in conversations with professional DOMs, professional subs, professional switches, it is lowercase d, capital S.
Oh.
Sub is in charge. The Dom is meant in charge. The sub is, if you are having something done to your body, a shocking misconception about domination or dominatrixes is that you just show up and they just beat the shit out of you. They are responsible for your body.
Right.
So whether it's blood play, if you are getting cut by a dom, if you have, the reason why people loved 50 Shades so much, I read it myself, and I
own the books.
I was like 18. I blushed reading it, but I also was a virgin. So I was like, oh goodness. Anastasia Steele, I'm pretty sure that's shocked. I still remember that. We are made to believe she feels liberated. And I think that ignited in a generation of moms the feeling of sexual liberation, not sex being a scheduled thing or a once a week or a once a month or a once a year. There was this liberation. They got to let go and someone took charge. But liberation does not and cannot happen without education. And so what it just threw out there was that you can get tied up and do this and you'll just feel great. If you don't know what you're doing or your partner doesn't know what they are doing, it's not going to feel great.
Right.
There was about a year ago now, I went to this sex positive kink party out in Brooklyn. And essentially what it was we all went to this basement somewhere that was teamy and secluded, and professional DOMs came out and did demonstrations, and then you could volunteer and you would go to their stations, and it was wax play, it was whipping, it was electrostimulation, but these are people who know what they are doing. Mm-hmm. And when we look at a relationship like Christian Grey and Anastasia Steele, this information.
Good job.
When we look at that kind of relationship, what you're seeing is a narcissist who is only getting off on control over another person's entire being, not even just when it's sex. And that is a kink unto itself. There's also a cuckold thing that is, these are really popular kinks. But Anastasia was not educated. She did not really know what she was getting into. And when she did not give consent, it didn't matter. And those are the problems. BDSM is actually about consent. It's why there are things like safe words. I can still yell out, ooh, stop, no, 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 no. But it's until I say that word. I know the word. And when I say that word, that's it. The play is done. It's about is playing. No matter how intense you take it or how laid back it might be. It might just be a quick little rope tie and that's it. But that can be enough for you. It also can be, getting clamped onto, a generator. And if that's what it is, you need to know what you're doing. Your partner needs to know what you're doing. You need to have safety precautions there. These are the ways in which to be able to practice kink as much as you want safely. And 50 Shades just obliterated that.
As we wrap up, I realize there are so many things we haven't talked about, so I know that this is part one of many other episodes, because we didn't touch on consent, we didn't touch on polygamy. I want to talk about other kinks. I'm really into looking at people that have been binded by rope and what that does for actually releasing and feeling free, regardless of sex. But to wrap up, Kenny, as part of Normalize This, your Instagram is full of vocabulary that most people don't use and have no idea what they are. So I have a bit of a list, and if you have any others that you wanted to share, what is a dilator?
So we hear dilators being talked about often when we talk about male to female transitioning. But they are actually things that anyone with a vagina, neo or not, can use. So dilators are essentially a training kit in a way. It is a way to keep the vaginal opening open. So there are women who have vaginismus, a condition that makes sex very painful. And so they will use dilators in order to literally dilate, like when you go to the doctor and then you dilated. It's about keeping the hole open so that it doesn't start to close up. Specifically when trans women post-op, once they've had their neo-vagina built, they use dilators in order for scar tissue not to form. That means they have to go back for further reconstructive surgeries if their vagina closes up. So essentially, oftentimes they look like dildos. That's a dilator.
I've seen one that's been, Instagram thinks they know what's happening in my life, and that's like a, it looks like a Pillsbury Doughboy, and there's like two round things, and it opens, and it's for actually to protect your cervix. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like that one seems really good for your health.
There are so many uses.
Okay.
Because it's also there are records of women using, like, when you're using a dilator, you don't necessarily, specifically like directly post-op, you're not just for lack of a better term, fucking yourself with the dilator. It is actually like you leave it in for a period of time. It is about keeping the space open and training the space to stay open. It's exactly why on like the other end of the spectrum, just back slightly, anyone can use training sets of like butt plugs. There is musculature that if you stretch and you keep it open, it will stay open. They are essential for trans women post-op if they've had bottom surgery, in order to keep that, but they are also used for many different purposes.
Educational.
Wow.
Okay. What is a sphincter?
The sphincter. Okay. I would presume that everyone listening has one, because it is, and if you are fully able, if you have all of the pieces of your body that are in the biology textbook, we have sphincters, and we have two of them. A sphincter is a piece of muscle that is in its relaxed position, it is closed or open, and it is a piece of muscle that can be stretched. So like you have multiple sphincters in your body. Your throat is a sphincter. It doesn't just stay open. You can close your vocal folds are technically a sphincter. Your urethra. You aren't just always peeing. You can hold your pee, and that sensation, what you're doing is you're closing that sphincter of your urethra. In your anus, you have two sphincters. You have an external and an internal sphincter. The external sphincter is what you see when you are looking at a butthole. That is your sphincter. There is an internal one as well. And so there are two different kinds of muscles. Sphincter can be made out of skeletal muscle or soft muscle. Skeletal muscle is muscle that you have complete control over. So like I can flex my bicep right now. I can use my legs to move. But then all the things inside, so that's what the external one is. We can all tighten and release. That's what we're feeling, tighten and release. Do your kegels. But smooth muscle or soft muscle is like your heart. I don't have to think to control that. And so your internal sphincter operates in the same way, which means that why often anal sex can be really painful is that it will stay closed unless you relax, unless you breathe, unless you lower your pelvic floor. That internal sphincter will stay in its contracted state. So even if something has made its way past the external one because you've, opened it up, if you aren't relaxed or if you aren't breathing properly, if you aren't doing the other things necessary to make that work, then your internal sphincter won't release enough to have pleasurable, safe, non-rectal damaging sex. Sphincters.
Thank you. What is sounding?
So sounding is when you stick an apparatus into your urethra. And so you will find this where I have seen it. I've only seen it in person once. I have seen it mostly in pornography, where there'll be like a metal rod, almost look like a knitting needle that isn't sharp in the end, or sometimes they're actual knitting needles that someone will insert into their urethra. It is a kink, but it's and
what does it do?
So I think it is pleasurable for the recipient of that. So it's something that generally we're seeing this with penises. Something that person would feel pleasure from. It's not. I've never seen someone do that and then have penetrative sex with someone else with that in. It is a singular act on its own that when it comes to what it does, when we think about like what things cause pleasure, pleasure is a sensory reaction. It doesn't need to be your clitoris or your it doesn't need to be the things we normally think of as the things that cause pleasure that are activated by it. Anything that has a lot of receptors in it can be pleasurable for certain people. So I know for some, kinks like that are often pleasurable because of the kind of the danger of it, the risk of it. I have never done it myself, so I don't know what it actually feels like, but people go crazy for it, so more power to you.
I was laughing at my face and Ricky's face because we both started like getting very confused and like pulling away.
Woo! Like my heart literally was beating so fast because I was like, no.
No one's doing it with like a thumb tap on the end. Like normally it's lubricant. There are things involved, but it's also with all this terminology. Why I think it's most important. I don't think I will ever participate in sounding. But when I was a late bloomer sexually. And so when I was first thrusting myself into the community, I wanted to learn everything I could and do everything possible because that's how I was going to learn and be better at sex. I often would say yes to things I didn't know. Right. Embarrassed to stop the situation or ask. And so I think just knowing what sounding is, if someone asked me, I would then know what that means. And so I could say, that's not for me, but if you're into that, let's continue that conversation. Let's talk about what that is. So that's why I think like it's very important to learn the vocabulary outside of your sexual interests so that if you're confronted with something, you don't say, sure, and then end up in a dangerous position.
We love sex ed. Thank you so much, Kenny, for joining. I wanted to say, because I realized I didn't, I am acknowledging the Abenaki tribe. That's the land in which I am living and safe on. As we end this, Kenny, we are going to ask you, just like, what's your Unck? What is your joy? And Ricky, we'll answer this too.
Non-sexually, but it is kind of my kink. My joy is reading with someone else who is also reading. Like being in the same space, but both just like reading books. I don't know what it is about it, but that's my happy place. I would replace every future orgasm with that experience if I could ensure that the book was good.
I love that. I love
Great.
that. Ricky, what about you? What's your joy today?
My joy today is I've just recently moved into a new apartment. And so just unpacking and finding new homes for old things, if that makes sense, is giving me joy.
So I'm away from the city and I hear birds often. So my joy was actually walking with my mother, who finally decided that she could see me because I got my coronavirus test and I don't have it. And I made her twirl in the fields as I sang Sound of Music. And that's my joy.
Love that.
That's my joy today. So thank you, Kenny, so much for coming.
Thank you for joining us.
If you'd allow us, we will share your Instagram page and normalize this on our Instagram when this episode gets posted.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. We cannot wait to have you back. I think that, this...
I mean...
I don't want to say this was part 1. I'm going to say this was part A, because I feel like there are at least 25 more episodes of sex to be uncovered. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, truly.
So how was that?
Honestly, amazing. I knew going in that Kenny is someone who has a lot of insight because of the work he's doing with his own podcast on education around sex and normalizing it. But I was happy to have a conversation. There were some uncky moments that I kind of always look forward to when it comes to things about sex. Like it's always going to be uncomfortable because as we said, like society's made it uncomfortable for no dang reason. And so, I thought it was great. What about you?
Yeah, I thought it was great too. I think that it's great to have different people's perspectives on things. What I will say about this whole journey that we are embarking on with Unck via this online medium, it's super great, but I cannot wait for COVID-19 pandemic to be over so that we can be in the same tangible space.
Yeah.
Just because I think that, conversations will flow a lot more easily, and, to have different people with their different opinions all bouncing off each other at the same time will be great, especially in a conversation about sex, but it was great, and I am looking forward to seeing the final edit.
Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5.
Right.
No, but you're right. I think like what this doesn't allow us for is to feel each other's energies. And so like if someone's passionate about something, the one thing we're not seeing really in an uncomfortable conversation is like dealing with that passion in real time, because no one's really responding to you, right? So you can like calm yourself down in your own little cubby hole. Yeah, should be interesting. I can't wait as well. But in the meantime, it was lovely chatting with you, and I'll see you next time.
See you next time.